It's my pleasure today to introduce June Gilliam to you. She's a former Chinese Communist Party member, which is shocking to me. She was born in Shanghai, immigrated to the US in 1998. As a child in China, in spite of hearing from her friends and relatives about all the suffering that fellow Chinese citizens were going through at the hands of the communist government, her indoctrination from birth was so strong that it took a long time for her to get over a decade of personal introspection and education to reach her current awareness of what the Communist Party is like. But she sums it up in two words: brutality and deceit. Lucky for us, June became a public speaker along her journey to becoming a clear-thinking, heartfelt, and brilliant American conservative patriot, which we really appreciate. Here today, she is sounding an alarm for all Americans, and she's going to tell us about the secret erosion of the foundation of America. Please join me in welcoming June Gilliam. All yours, June.
I am so excited. I am so excited to be the first online speaker of your group. And I am more excited to be able to connect with each and every one of you through this platform and to talk about something that is so important to us and that is literally changing our life every day and every minute. And so you probably have a lot of questions regarding this unique virus that's caught so much attention from media. And where did it come from? Is it really a bioweapon? Well, let's start from a female scientist from the Wuhan P4 lab, and her name is Shi Zhenli. By the way, can you see my screen full?
You're good.
Okay, great. And she's often referred by her colleagues in China as China's Batwoman, because she started her virus hunting expeditions in bat caves in China as early as 2004. Now, back then, she and her team decided to embark on this very difficult journey with a very slim hope that they would be able to trace the source of the SARS virus. If you remember the 2003 outbreak, that was a kind of disease that caused 8,100 people to be infected. And so that her team's effort was really like looking for a needle in a haystack. It wasn't that easy. They didn't know what type of bats. All they knew was it was linked to a kind of bat. After 7 years of a lot of hard work, they actually hit the jackpot. In Yunnan province, in Kunming, actually, that's the city, they found a bat cave, and inside that bat cave, they discovered about 10 SARS-like viruses. And there's especially one type of bat that has a virus that bears 97% genetic similarity of the SARS virus. And after another 5 years of sampling research, she and her team concluded to the world that this type of bat is the source of SARS virus. So instantly, Shi Zhenli became the celebrity, or the most renowned virologist in the world. And in about 2015, she partnered with a group of coronavirus experts from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill to publish a paper in the journal Nature Medicine. Now, just to put it in plain English, what this paper is about is that they discovered a new SARS-like virus. And this virus could jump directly from its bat host to humans without mutation. And there was no treatment for it. Now, later on, the US team decided to suspend the research because of our government's policies on so-called gain-of-function type of research. But the Chinese continued. And this, ladies and gentlemen, is the natural origin of the current pandemic. Now, you probably wonder, so how did it get leaked? The P4 lab is the highest level of the biosafety labs in the world. Well, there are multiple theories about this, and I think the most convincing one is really twofold. First of all, it's about management. Now, according to the systems, all the animal carcasses that after research should be sterilized. Normally they use formalin, it's a chemical solution. They use that formalin to sterilize the animal carcasses and then seal them in plastic bags, store them in refrigerators, and then carry them out collectively and get incinerated in a centralized manner. And then now for developed countries in Europe and America, there's very strict supervision mechanisms and also management systems. And the lab workers consciously abide by and respect those regulations. But things are quite different in China. When I was a little kid, I actually read stories about formalin treated meat. And that's horrible stories because formalin is used as a solution to treat rotten meat to get rid of that smell. And then you wash it away, and then you cook it with meat tenderizers and spices and seasonings, and you couldn't tell any difference. Now, if you search formalin treated meat in Baidu, on Baidu website, which is like a Google-like search engine in China, you'll find more than 46 pages of very relevant content. So what does it mean? It has a lot of coverage of those horrible stories, and it seems has become an unspoken rule for some greedy vendors. So let's say, what if this contractor of animal carcass disposal to the Wuhan P4 lab, what if he didn't burn or incinerate those animals according to the regulations? What if, out of greed, he sold those animals' bodies to markets, including the seafood market, which is just so conveniently located only 10 miles away from the lab? Now, there's another theory that Shi Zhenli and her team used to be very sloppy in terms of protective measures when they conducted their field work. Her theory back then was that although bats are full of viruses, but their chances of infecting humans are very slim. So as you can see here on the screen, the picture on the top is she and her team are crawling underneath a huge rock to get into a bat cave. And you see their bare arms, no masks or whatsoever. And on the left-hand side, this is the picture of she and her team pinching bats using their hands to collect virus samples. And also you see the picture of scars of bat bites through gloves. So all in all, it is almost impossible for people who are in so close contact to bats not to be infected. And initially, these viruses, they were not very deadly, and they could easily get into human cells to replicate and mutate over the course of time. And those human bodies, they can develop antibodies and become asymptomatic, or we call it the super spreaders. So these two combinations of the loophole of the P4 lab management, as well as the chances of Shi Zhenli and her team get infected and then going into the community to infect others, I think are the most convincing theories of how this virus got escaped. Now, we all know that China failed to inform the world and inform its people of this initial virus outbreak in a timely manner. But many few of us understand the true magnitude of this unprecedented cover-up. So just to share with you some of the highlights, I'd like to talk about some of the key dates. December 1st was the first time the first patient in Wuhan was identified. And almost 4 weeks later, on December 27th, COVID-19 virus was discovered. And then a few days later, we all know about the whistleblowers. Now, Dr. Zhang Aifeng, the director of the emergency department of the Wuhan Central Hospital, she's actually the first one. She's actually the first whistleblower, or we call her the whistle giver. When she saw a patient's record, she circled the word SARS, and she took an image of it, and she sent it to another doctor at another hospital. Soon, that was spread throughout the medical circles within Wuhan. And on the same day, it circled back to Dr. Li Wenliang, who happened to work at the same hospital as Dr. Zhang Aifeng. And then Li later shared that tweet with his former classmates via WeChat. And that tweet was reposted many times and became public. Now, interestingly, through the online internal military documents, we now came to know that the Naval College of Engineering in Wuhan actually had an internal policy or an internal lockdown policy as early as January 2nd. It didn't allow any outside visitors to go to that school, and anyone who had to enter the campus had to take body temperature. Now, the day after that, poor Dr. Li Wenliang, he was summoned by Wuhan police and admonished by because of the accusation was falsely spreading the comment on the internet. And however, on the same day, when Dr. Li Wenliang was punished, the Chinese Communist Party, for the first time, gave the U.S. government a briefing on the epidemic situation. Now, this was later shared at the press conference in February by the spokeswoman of the Chinese Foreign Ministry Affairs. And then she uses example to kind of refute the U.S. blame of China lack of transparency of the information sharing. But that went backfired. As soon as that news came out, when the Chinese people just exploded, why the hell that the Chinese government actually shared a briefing with U.S. as early as January 3rd, while kept billions of its citizens in dark for so many days? Let me move. And then the government kept lying to its citizens. On January 11th, the CCP still said that there was no human-to-human spread. And on the 17th, the internal news about the upcoming Wuhan lockdown was circulated within the top elite the officials in Wuhan. So many of those started abandoning the city. Interestingly, a day after that, a district in Wuhan actually held a unprecedented 40,000 family banquets in celebration of the Chinese New Year. Now, the mayor of Wuhan back then endorsed and personally attended this banquet. And later he kind of explained to the reporters who were interviewed, he said, well, the justification was because back then the information said there was no firm human-to-human spread, therefore, I mean, it made perfect sense for us to continue that banquet. But later they found out that over 50 families, at least 50 families, got infected through that interaction at the banquet. Now, finally, on January 20th, the government admitted there was a possibility of human-to-human spread. And then 3 days later, we came to know the Wuhan lockdown. Over 50 million people. Wuhan is a city 5 times the size of London, with 11 million residents itself. And then the lockdown also included 17 surrounding cities. So all in all, the impacted population is about 15 million. Ironically, on the same day, just a few hours after the lockdown started, Xi Jinping actually gave a speech, an inspiring speech, let's put it that way, the China Dream. His China Dream talking about the 2020, China 2030, talking about Belt and Road initiatives. But that dream seemed to leave the 50 million people behind because he didn't mention a word about Wuhan, nor the lockdown, nor the coronavirus. And so his speech actually outraged the entire Chinese population, and many people asked, which is more important at this time, life-saving or dreaming? Seems to have a hard time to advance. Now, we all know that communism is a master of deceit. And it seems to us that the Chinese propaganda has taken this whole pandemic or epidemic at the beginning, this whole propaganda campaign to the new heights. And some of the tactics it uses so well is actually the diversion and whataboutism, and also the government stage acting and false narratives. So the diversion was very interesting because one day before the Wuhan lockdown, the local media over there started reporting the fact that over 6,600 people in America had already died from 2019 influenza. And now the fundamental difference between the CDC estimate deaths of the food-related, people in U.S. is that here we include the flu-related complication, the deaths of the flu-related complication, but China does not. So the China number was shockingly low, it's only 144. Someone did a study to show that on average, the food-related complications, and then that led to the deaths, is about 88,000 every year in China, at least. But the government like to use that as a distraction kind of the point to show that the U.S. is actually seeing something far more severe than what back then was dealing with in Wuhan. And also on the top side of this slide, you see this woman twice. And then because there are a lot of complaints about the horrible conditions of those makeshift hospitals. So the media decided to interview this patient who was recently released by a makeshift hospital. And she said to the camera that she had such a great time that she did not want to leave. And then later, people found out that this person was the same actress from another report 10 days ago, where she was a nurse and talking about different things. And then the lower picture is actually, interesting because the spokesperson of the Foreign Ministry Affairs said that China, the government, is very quick in terms of providing the adequate hospital facilities, and then claimed that this hospital had been constructed in just 16 hours at the center of the epidemic. And later it got busted because people found that it was this exact same picture of a container school building on the other side of the country. And the conspiracy theory, you all have heard that China now blames US to be the source of this this virus and the source of this pandemic. So again, the same spokesperson, Zhao Lijian, in March said that the U.S. might be the U.S. Army, actually, who went to join a game in Wuhan last year, might actually brought the epidemic to Wuhan. And a week later, this renowned doctor, Dr. Zhong Nanshan, echoed on that and said that, well, indeed, the coronavirus took place in China, in Wuhan, but it doesn't mean its source is in Wuhan. Now, I want to tell you that the U.S. has always been this bad guy, has always been this criminal from day one, and it has this theory of, plan of overturning the glorious China ever since the Communist Party took over. Whereas if you look at the initial reaction of Russia and then North Korea at the beginning of the outbreak, North Korea was the first country to close its borders, and Russia actually questioned every Chinese that the police or the investigation teams could find in the street, and then asked them questions and then sent them back to China. But the Chinese Communist regime did not dare to say a word or complain about those two countries. Why? Because they share a similar ideology. Now, I want to spend a little bit of time to talk about the China Health Organization. There's a little story back then in 2003 when during the SARS outbreak. Back then, the World Health Organization did not believe a word about the information that the Chinese Communist regime shared about the severity of the SARS outbreak. So it decided to send its own team to do investigation. Now, this unplanned trip created chaos, complete chaos in local hospitals in Beijing. One hospital scrambled to actually send all its patients to a nearby hotel. Another hospital didn't have a lot of money, but it was very creative. So it hired some minivan drivers and bused those patients along with medical staff around the city of Beijing for a day to give them a day trip to avoid being seen by the WHO or the WHO people. Now, this whole thing, China felt really humiliated by this incident, and it vowed to control the board election of the WHO. And therefore, in 2006, Margaret Chan was successfully elected to be the general director of the organization. Now, she was the same person back then during the 2003 SARS outbreak. She was in charge of the health in Hong Kong, and it was under her leadership. Hong Kong saw over 285 deaths during that outbreak because she naively believed whatever the Communist China, the information that the Chinese regime shared with Hong Kong back then. And Margaret Chan had 2 terms to be the general director of this organization. But before she wrote off, she ensured that her successor would continue to operate under the heavy influence of China. And this, we all know who this person is. And he's a career politician. He's the first non-physician to this role. And he's also a communist and one of the top 3 leaders of a terrorist organization in his own country. And I know his comments, his praises of China's response to the pandemic. I know that it's appalling. And then I think a lot of people understand. And then his comments actually renewed a new debate over WHO and also United Nations and other similar organizations, a long debate over their independence. Now, we all know that China only gives 10% of the US, what the US is giving on a yearly basis, but China also has a promise to increase that fund by 2030. And then if you look at the epicenters outside China, and there's a clear trace, you can see that some of those countries are not geographically located near China. However, all these countries that are hit hard by the current pandemic all have extensive interests in communist China. And I want to start with Italy. Italy is the first and only nation in G7 to sign on the Belt and Road Initiative with communist China. Milan, Venice, and many other cities in Italy have also signed sister city agreements with many cities in China. And in Spain was the first country to send a prime minister to China after the Tiananmen Square massacre. And right now, China holds nearly 12% of the total debts, the government bonds of Spain, and has become the second largest creditor country of Spain. And in last year, Spain also cooperated with communist China to block Shenyang Performing Arts from visiting the country. And in France was actually the first Western country to establish diplomatic relationship with communist China, and also has a long history of pro-communism, in its top leadership. The previous prime minister of France was responsible for helping China to set up that Wuhan P4 lab. And the current president, Macron, once called himself a Maoist. And in Germany, there are many regional authorities in Germany that actually signed on to the Belt and Road Initiative. So they are very pro-communist. And the country fired its own security minister who opposes Huawei and allowed China to purchase many high-tech enterprises in Germany. In fact, the European headquarters of Huawei and the ZTE are both in Germany. Now, Iran, you know that the Iranian regime has had strategic partnership with Communist China for many years. What about South Korea? The fact of the matter is the Chinese Communist regime helped the current President Moon to be elected. And just not long ago, over 1.4 million people signed a petition in South Korea requesting Moon to step down. And it reads that watching President Moon's response to the epidemic made us believe that President Moon is more like a president for China than for Korea. And also Japan. Japan now kind of keeps distance, with China. However, I think in this case, Japan truly put profit over prudence. With millions of Chinese go to Japan every year for shopping and then sightseeing, the country was very slow to close its borders to block the outbreak. And then last but not least, our country, the United States. I have to say that Communist China has fully penetrated our government, our think tanks, our enterprises, and our non-governmental organizations. Brookings institutions and other top think tanks have already become platforms for Huawei. And many scholars, our scholars, Chinese or American, have been bought by this 1,000 Talents program. And on Wall Street, there are so many financial predators originally helped China to join WTO. And then we know that Morgan Stanley had this Trojan program. It's a symbol of the tight relationship between Wall Street and the Chinese Communist Party elites, because it allowed the party officials to actually send its children to come to America to start their life. And everything is actually paid for by Morgan Stanley. And we all know that there are too many accounting firms, security firms, and investment banks help China to cheat and help at least over 1,000 Chinese firms to enrich themselves through IPOs here in the United States. So this whole development of the outbreak outside China, I think it's actually shows that for those countries who still fall to the deceptions of Communist China, or who still choose to get really close or aligned with Communist China, are the ones that actually will taste the bitter fruits of that involvement in the long run. Now, here's the bright side out of this whole pandemic. When the news of Dr. Li Wenliang's death broke, the social media platforms in China were flooded by griefs and then actually those very sad messages. And the two leading hashtags were Wuhan police owes, the Wuhan government owes Dr. Li Wenliang an apology, and that we want freedom of speech. Now, those two hashtags drew over millions of viewers before they finally got censored. Now, I captured this heartbreaking quote from someone's tweet because it just very sad to see that back then. It reads, "Not allowed to speak, not allowed to die, not allowed to be angry, not allowed to desire. Are we allowed to at least remember?" Well, people in China do remember. Months later, when Dr. Zhang Aifen finally decided to break the silence to a local magazine, her story was quickly deleted after just hours of being published. This time, the internet users in China learned quickly to come up together, to come up with different versions, to preserve and share this article on the social media platforms. And then many were so creative, one actually wrote the story backwards. One used Asian Chinese character code, one used emoji, one used Morse code, and then many used different languages. And then their goal was to actually to make the content more difficult to be recognized and scrubbed by those censorship programs. And as of now, there are about 52 versions of the story on social media. I have to say that the Chinese people are waking up. For those who've been managed under this harsh treatment right now by the regime, they come to recognize that the same tactics that the regime is using on them has been applied many times to others, from the students in Tiananmen Square, from the Falun Gong practitioners, to the underground Christians, to Uyghurs, to those human rights activists. And people are waking up. They come to understand that silence will no longer be effective, and they must come up together to make a difference. And here we have some heroes. The top left, this nurse who actually took to the social media to tell the world what was going on in Wuhan, probably just a few days after the lockdown. And then she said, "I'm here to tell the truth. Do not believe anything that the government told you. There are hundreds of thousands of people dying in here in Wuhan." And then here in the middle of the top, over 180,000 of lawsuits have been fired against the Communist Party of China. Many of those are the Falun Gong victims. And then we see the Hong Kong protesters on the top right. And then the bottom left, those are some of the pictures of those activists or the dissidents, missing dissidents from Wuhan. And then we, in the center bottom, we see this booth in the San Francisco Fisherman's Wharf. It was a booth to really share the truth about what Communist Party is to those tourists from mainland China and ask them to quit the party. And then we see this lady, she says, "Wake up, all China citizens." She actually took her selfie, the video, and she was actually locked down and during that time. And then she said, "People from Tibet, people from Hong Kong, people from Taiwan, I support you 100%. We need to come up together. We need to actually bring down this evil force. So this is the bright side out of this pandemic. And I think the world is waking up. And in a way, I think our country, the United States, and the rest of the Western countries do owe China a thank you. Because this is a hard-learned wake-up call to us all. And I believe that we will come out of this. We will come out of this stronger, and we will come out of this with the belief that eventually the good will prevail. And then that is today's talk. Thank you very much. And I'm going to turn to Wendy.
June, that's scary. That's very interesting. Okay, we have some questions coming in, if you're ready. And thank you so much for educating us on this, what the world's going through here. Okay, Stephen Thayard wants to know, what's the word on forced vaccinations in both China and the US against this virus? Any word on that?
I do not know much about China, but I do know that in here, I know Bill Gates is proposing it, and I think he has his own agenda. I think he wants to use this to enrich himself because he's behind this vaccine development, and I think probably he has other agenda as well. The world, we know that there's a strong correlation between the vaccine back then and the spike of autism that we see in kids. And I believe that Bill Gates being the new world order kind of the advocate, I think his involvement in this must have multiple purposes. And
you know, interestingly enough, Dran Reese left a comment. I don't know if you guys were reading through the Q&A there, but she says that this is a manufactured virus and Bill Gates actually owns the patent. I don't know if she's left yet or not, but she says he's working with the World Health Organization, preparing for this pandemic. And how did they know it was coming? And he is apparently working on this microchip concept too, where people are going to get microchipped with the vaccines. Sounds pretty creepy.
yeah, well, there's a remember I said earlier that Shi Zhenli, that female scientist, she partnered with University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, and then later the U.S. stopped the research, but the Chinese continued. And I would believe that Bill Gates or probably some others got to know that and then kept supporting the Chinese in a way to get it developed to this date. In fact, I think there's some people in Japan said that they already knew the outbreak a month before December last year. They knew that there was something going on in China, and then now they regretted not speaking up because they said if they did that, and then the world will be completely different today.
Yeah, that's a scary thought. Okay, we have a question from James Oren. I think you're going to have to tell me next time we meet in person how you pronounce your last name. But he wants to know, what's the current situation in China? We hear about new outbreaks in Harbin, a famous northern city that has artistic ice sculptures in a festival each year.
Yes, that is correct. Because the province is next to Russia, and because Russia bussed so many Chinese back to the country, and Harbin, that's the province where those came back from Russia actually stayed at. And so yes, it's getting very severe, and I don't know if they have started a lockdown already or not. The government hasn't admitted, but there are a lot of speculations. And also on the southern part of Guangzhou, it's the province next to Hong Kong, have seen some waves as well. And then it's interesting because there are a lot of Africans in China, and they are all in the Guangdong, that province. And then so the Chinese actually pushed them out to some lockdown places, and then so they become the target of that. And then there are also pockets of those different cities and provinces close to Hebei, where Wuhan is. And so I believe the next wave is coming, and I believe the next wave will be worse than the first one. I'm not here to scare everyone, This morning I was just telling my husband, I said, please, use your caution, because he's very happy about the potential of opening up the business again. But I said, look, it's going to come here again, and it's going to be worse. With now China right now is very desperate to get back to the economy, and then so there are so many super spreaders out there, and then there are so many people infected. But because economy is more important right now than lives, so you wouldn't hear much about this second wave until, I would say, probably it's completely out of hand.
Yeah, that's scary. Okay, Rana Shpal and Amelie had sort of a similar question. They wanted to know, can you once again go over the notification from the CCP on the 3rd of January to the US? And they claimed that they'd given notice, and why was it disproven?
Oh no, they claim they briefed US on the epidemic development back then, and then they share with US some of the protective measures that they did, and then they said within a month they actually give US about 30 updates. And this is probably true. They gave to US CDC or some government officials, but because they kept lying, they didn't say that there was a possibility of spread from human to human, and it wasn't that big deal. So I'm sure about the fact that they did briefed US 30 times, but I don't know to what extent of the content that they shared with US. And then this, I said, it backfired because the Chinese people didn't know any of this until the end of, until the Wuhan lockdown happened, which we're talking about literally 21 days of delay. So a lot of the news here, media, you hear them say, hey, they delayed at least 6 days and that can save a lot of people. No, not 6 days. We're talking about 21 days.
3 weeks is a long time.
Yeah.
Oh, question is, I'm hearing about an HIV strain in COVID-19, and do you think this was a biowarfare agent?
Very good question. I know there are a lot of theories. And then I stick to what Fox News thinks, and because I've done a lot of research, and I tend to believe that. I think this is, if you believe in karma, if you believe the cause and effect, really, everything has cause and effect relationship. I do believe that this is nature's punishment to the Communist Party. I do believe that it came from a natural origin, and that virus that I just shared with you. And over the course of time, it evolves and mutates. And it, like AIDS, is very intelligent. But I know that a group of Indian scientists, they published a paper saying that they've seen the combination of HIVs and other proteins in this virus, but later they backed down because they didn't have enough proof. I would say that right now there's no proof to say that strong proof to say that this is for sure 100% this is manufactured. So I like to stick to that theory that over the course of time it actually evolved to become the current one.
Yeah, and that it's not actually some horrific thing that somebody's trying to do here. Question from Joanne Thomas. What are the names of the whistle giver and the whistleblower again?
So we know that the male doctor who died, right? Dr. Levin, yeah, the one that wearing glasses, and then you saw that. Dr. Zhang Aifen, you can remember her as Aifen, A-I-F-E-N. Dr. Zhang Aifen, and when she gave the interview later on, she called herself the whistle giver because she was the first one who actually started this whole social media chats about this SARS-like virus, because she took a picture, she sent it out, and then just coincidentally, Dr. Li Wenliang worked at the same hospital as Dr. Zhang Aifen, but they didn't know each other. She didn't know. She didn't even get a chance to know him before he died. But yeah, they happened to work in the same hospital, but different departments. Zhang Aifen is the director of emergency department, so she saw firsthand those patients, how severe they were, and then so she read their patients' records. She took an image of that. She circled the word SARS, and she sent it out to her friends at other hospitals, and then that circulated back to Li Wenliang, and he posted it on WeChat, and then that was reposted many times, and then that just outraged the Wuhan police and the government.
Oh, okay, question from Jane. How do you communicate with those waking up in China? What do you suggest we do to encourage our corporations and educational institutes to decouple from China, given that they're so penetrated? Any
Yeah,
ideas on that?
I think the question is twofold. How do we do to help the people in China? Really to figure out all different kinds of ways to help them go through, to break through the firewall. People have the rights to know the truth. And this is the fundamental number one that to me is the human rights thing. And never underestimate the power of truth. Once they understand the truth, and I think anything can happen, just like the Berlin Wall collapsed overnight and the Soviet Union collapsed overnight. That was all because of people knowing what's going on. And the biggest helpfulness to them is to empower them to break that firewall. And now the second part of it, I don't think our US companies right now have a choice. I think it's a trend that everyone is exiting from China, whether you like it or not. And I think this, again, this is one of the few things that, good things coming out of this pandemic, is that it whacked everyone on the head and said, wake up. You see the response change from Boris Johnson to Huawei's involvement. You see, the similar response from Macron, from others. And I think this will unite those Western countries and will recognize together how evil the regime is. I mean, really, Communist China is like the virus itself. So there is right now a petition from the White House to please, President Trump, do not call it China virus or Wuhan virus. Call it the CCP or the Communist China, Chinese Communist Party virus, because it is more accurate. It is indeed incubated by the party. Because if the party wasn't so greedy, try to compete against US in bioweapon and all those kind of technologies, it wouldn't continue that research.
Yeah. Epoch Times has been calling it the CCP virus from the beginning. Interesting. Yes. Okay, question from Louis. In light of the majority of ultra-liberal leaders in Silicon Valley, ain't that the truth? Do you feel threatened being so honest and forthcoming about the actions of the CCP, about the epidemic?
Yeah, a little bit. Yeah, I work for a very ultra-liberal company as well. But what can you do? I mean, we all have to take risks. And I feel like I love this country. And I share this with many audience from my personal journey. We all have responsibility to this country. I feel like I owe this country. I love it. The freedom of this country, the democracy, it's anything that is possible. This Americanism intrigues so many millions of immigrants to come here. And we feel like this is the last standing, really, country between the evil and the complete takeover. So we must stand up. And there's risk to speak up. There's a risk to being recognized as a conservative. But you have to do it.
Okay, question from John. How do you combat you're clearly racist and whatnot every time this is brought up? That it comes from China, whatever.
Yeah, that's a tough question, because I personally do not have that problem. But I know that if you try to convince people and they look at you, you're white, you're male, you're whatever, and then, yeah. I think, again, it's the truth. You move away from your emotion and then try to calm them down. Give them truth, just like what Dennis Prager is doing, just like many others are doing, is you give them those facts, you give them those truths. Again, this applies to Chinese people, this applies to people everywhere. For those people who have been brainwashed for so long, you got to figure out a way to intrigue them, to at least start a conversation with you, to at least be willing to hear a few sentences from you. And then you drop some content in there, you drop some truth in there. And then you do this kind of like fishing game, You're going to give them something and let them do research on their own. Let them come back to you with more questions, more debates, and you give them more. Little by little, you pull them over to this side. And that's my recommended strategy.
Okay. Question from Vito. Are you familiar or aware of Dr. Rashid Buttar? Buttar?
No, not really.
Okay.
Tell me a little bit.
That's a
Please
name.
tell me a little bit. I've seen a lot of emails, a lot of articles. I just haven't had time to read in details, but I've heard the name. But tell me what it's about, and maybe I can share with you my view.
Okay, question from Zach. He wants to know how China, Lao Beijing, for commoners, I guess, be affected by, how will commoners be affected by changing dynamics between China and the US?
Oh, that's a very interesting question. I love it. So, you know that the Chinese regime always depicts US as this evil country and trying to overturn communist China. And so before the outbreak, when China and US were in the lockdown of this trade war, the local media actually conducted a survey and say, hey, if we are indeed entering the trade war with US and we need money to win this war, would you be able to help us, support us, donate us? And surprisingly, a lot of responses are like, oh no, I would donate to US. No, I will sell everything I have to raise money to help US. Oh no, I will volunteer to be the guide for US to come here and then to bring you down. So they finally had to take down that survey, but it was just so funny. So I would say the majority of the people, they're not fools, they're not idiots. Many times they choose to be silent because they have no other way. But through this whole episode, you see more and more people do not care. They are not afraid of dying, the possibility of thrown in jail, being tortured or died. To them, this is life or death. The freedom, the right to know the truth has never been so important to the Chinese people than now.
Yep, interesting. Okay, Lydia wants to know, did you have one revelation or what inspired your big change in life?
Oh, so you have to listen to my other talk. So I was a Communist Party member. I was very brainwashed. For the first 10 years I lived in this country, I had the same mindset as if I lived in China. It wasn't until I saw that performing arts group, Shen Yun, I shared this in my other talk, that 11 years ago, that completely changed my view. That was the tipping point in my life. For the first time, I didn't know that my culture was so spiritual, was so divine. And I didn't know that the Communist Party could be so evil, because that performing arts group featured some dances that, exposing the persecution that's happening today. So as I walked out that day, that was in 2008, I had this burning question of finding out who was telling me the truth, whether it's a performing arts group or the Communist Party, that I always believed in for all my life up till that point. And then so this intrigued me to start my own research on communism. And again, the truth sets people free. The truth actually guided me to become who I am now. And I'm very proud to be a true American patriot and to be able to share my journey to awaken those who need to be awakened.
And we're very proud to stand with you too. Last question. Carlos wants to know, have you ever considered running for office?
Thank you so much. Not at this point, but I will support whoever is running. And I know that Vicky, you're probably listening, Vicky Norden. Mm-hmm. And I applaud for your courage. It takes a lot to step up. And I will actually bring a lot of folks like me who truly understand the nature of communism to support whoever will fight for the future of California, for the fight for the future of our country. It is that important. But right now, I'm just very happy with what I'm doing, is to keep giving those talks to the people who need to listen.
Mm-hmm. Good, thank you. There are some questions left about, do you offer this in Mandarin? Are you available to speak to other groups and whatnot? But I think we can get to those people on the side and give them contact information as they see fit. And I see Jana's back. So at this point, I'm going to excuse myself and you guys can finish up the meeting. Thank you so much.
Yeah, we did offer June an honorarium, but she actually said, please, I would rather have people get a subscription to the Epoch Times. And if you're not familiar with the Epoch Times, it's the truth. June, do you want to just say a little word about the Epoch Times?
Certainly. This is the newspaper that helped me tremendously when I did my research on communism. It has so much information, so many insights. And I would say it is probably the bravest paper that I've seen today. And it is tradition embracing its truth telling. And I know that Trump actually ordered White House to subscribe 100 copies recently. And he mentioned stories from this newspaper 4 or 5 times last year in his social media tweets. So this is something, again, that goes back to the truth sets people free and empowers people. And it is my ultimate wish that you can take this truth-telling paper to educate your family, your friends, and those that desperately need to be awakened.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, June. And today, we want everybody to win a raffle prize. So this is your raffle prize. Thank you so much. We really appreciate you being here, and we'll see you in our next meeting. Have a great day.